in many other the world, or even historically, and I think that's what the worry is. Smaller countries.
Responding to these concerns, do you think it
India cannot match China in terms of lending, so I think that the trade volume, trying to have conversations and links with the Indian Chamber of Commerce, it's more to have more conversations, trying to figure out.
Lani Mullen. Solomon Islands is included among 10 countries in the world with and 2018. The UN Children's Agency, UNICEF, says 5 other Pacific countries also the Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Palau and Nauru. Due to better antenatal care, increased immunisation rates, more among Ireland's maternal and child health specialist for UNICEF, Dr. Ibrahim Dari, told Jenny Meyer about what has helped more children survive.
We've been working very closely with government, support and guidance. There's been significant coordination with other partners as well. But we feel specifically there's been increase in immunization rates, particularly measles vaccine coverage has increased. Reduced the number of new vaccines, like PCV was introduced. PCV protects against pneumonia and causes of silence. So perhaps we could say the vaccines are working to reduce the incidence of pneumonia and thereby reduce mortality. We've also been working in collaboration with other sectors, protection issues, and women, pregnant women, they deliver under the attendance of a skilled bed practitioner, like a health worker, a trained worker, midwife.
Have you got special things that you've done there to try and improve things at the start of life?
In UNICEF's New Country Program for the next 5 years, from 2018 to 2022, where one of our primary focus is the 1,000 days approach. And the 1,000 days looks at antenatal, that is the 9 months of pregnancy and the first 2 neonatal mortality, strengthening newborn health and newborn care, particularly essential early newborn care, which happens within 7 days, such as feeding, as you know, is very important. And also protecting the mother from pregnancy with vaccines to protect baby from having neonatal tetanus, the cause of mortality. Yeah, so we're working around all this, strengthening this, but also building the health worker capacity. I think we've invested in training a lot of health workers in the country, at the provincial and those at the front line.
I saw that last year you introduced a manual for healthcare workers.
Yes. That has also been significant because this pediatric health workers use at health clinics and not big posts. This reinforces the training we do for health workers so they can now easily refer. One of the addition to that, we worked on algorithm as well, because to identify sometimes some of the causes of mortality the kind of interventions that happen when there's an emergency. It could flip the coin in either way, either do the right thing and or the child survives, or do the wrong thing and the child does not survive. So the emergency algorithm, hospital health workers has also been very helpful in improving child survival.
That was UNICEF Solomon Islands Dr. Ibrahim Dadari talking to Jenny Meyer. People of the Pacific need to decolonise their minds and reflect on the traditional role of women as men's equals. That call came from New Zealand's Minister of Pacific People on the country's Suffrage Day, marking 125 years since women won the right to vote. Speeches were set against a backdrop of Pacific and Māori women's dance and song. Dominic Goff.
Honoured the contributions of Pacific and Māori foremothers to democracy in New Zealand. A former Minister of Pacific Peoples, Lua Manuvau Dame Winnie Laban, was among those paying homage to women of the past.
The whakapapa and rafa of the powerful that birthed us, generations of women and men in our whānau and ainga who continue to tell our stories through the arts.
Lua Manuvau paid tribute to Bonifacio and the women leadership. Salah says women's strength is not defined only by the ability to succeed politically.
We need their imagination, we need their contribution, we need their wisdom for all of us. You know, without...
Tufai Su'a William Sio spoke of the traditional role among Pacific women in colonial times.
History will show us that women are incapable of providing the good leadership. Mostly Salamasina, as I'm told, ruled for 40 years. And that's a similar story of many of the islands.
Was succeeded by her daughter, as well as Queen Pomare, who ruled Tahiti in the 1800s. He spoke of the many islands in Fiji, which are held by women, and of Queen Salate of Tonga, not their first woman monarch. He says they're all great inspiration for present-day leaders like President Hilda Heine of the Marshall Islands and Pacific women MPs in New Zealand. Alpizzo highlighted Samoa's constitutional amendment in 2013 requiring that at least 10% of parliamentary seats go to women. But he says one major obstacle...
Instead of the glass ceiling, it's a wall of men. Block form women political leaders in the Pacific region.
He says it's getting better, but the momentum differs from country to country. The Green Party spokesperson for Pacific People, co-leader Marama Davidson, says women need to keep disrupting the patriarchy to increase their say in society. While she commended the contribution of Pacific and Māori women in New Zealand, she says there is more work to do. She drew inspiration from one of the Mausina dancers, Brandon.
It means that we've got to... because there's a lot more mahi for us to do together, and what I loved about today was the connection of being made very strong and very clear.
The region have done a lot of work to reconnect the people of Oceania and champion their issues. She praised the late on gender, militarism and feminism.
And Oceania Interrupted, which is Māori and Pacific women working together for the independence of West Papua, and remembering the ongoing work that we've done to understand that which brings us together as Māori and Pacific women.
People need to look to strong leadership roles of women in pre-colonial history to get their future right.
It is about changing our mindset and being able to be the authors of our own solution, to navigate the future based on our traditional values, on our indigenous knowledge.
He says the fight for equality today isn't just but across all areas, and freedom from domestic violence. This is Dominic Godfrey.
The Pacific Rugby Players Welfare Group says the sport's governing body, World Rugby, won't engage with it over its Seats at the Table campaign. The campaign calls for greater representation of Pacific Island countries on. The group's director, Dan Leo, says it's important Leo told Vinnie Wiley he wants an audience that she can hear. Gosper.
In unofficial capacities, we've met a couple of times. He was probably more receptive to meeting with me before he knew what we were pushing for, which is fairness for the Pacific Islands around the World Rugby Council, and actually not just one seat, what the Fijian and Samoan unions are there for one seat, in terms of really pushing for player well. Three seats is not going to make a difference. You're never going to be able to challenge the hierarchy. As a block have 30. So even if they were to be given a token one seat each, nothing changes in terms of player welfare. Eligibility laws, we would never be able to challenge any of the voting process on that. So to the unions themselves to step up, and actually call for what is fair, not just for having a token seat. And then I don't want to engage in conversations with and the players' associations that they fund through talk with you. So they're not impartial and they're not getting an independent voice. And Samoan and Fijian unions can't speak up because they rely so much on funding. You've seen it with the Seats at the Table campaign. That was actually their benefit, which is absolutely, they're so reliant on